The violence at a rally organized by hate groups in Charlottesville, Virginia, has prompted new concerns about an event planned in Boston. Conservative organizers planning a rally on Boston Common deny any connection to the hate groups in Virginia. Officials in Boston hope to prevent any violence, but there's also widespread concern about response to recent events by President Trump. With some thoughts on the racial climate and the state of leadership is our guest, the founder and executive director of the New Democracy Coalition, Kevin Peterson. Thank you very much for being with us, Kevin.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
I want to start at the top with the president's initial statement about Charlottesville, Virginia on Saturday. And essentially it was, it's only about behavior, it's not about ideas.
Yeah, behaviors, and there wasn't adequate force behind his words in terms of speaking to the bad behavior of those conservative protesters. Conservative protesters is probably a too light of a word to use here. They're neo-Nazis and racists. And President Trump had at his hands a very teachable moment, and a moment where he could have extended his moral authority, his political authority also, as President of the United States, and he blew it. And so many people across the country now are so disappointed, some of whom elected him, so disappointed about his comportment and his demeanor as the country was shocked to see the violence in Charlottesville.
Well, we saw the reports of some of the comments from some of those activists. That's the polite term for them. But it seems like from Trump's statement that no set of ideas was really all that much worse than any other. I mean, it's almost like this stuff is normal.
Yeah, he was trying to draw a moral equivalency between those who were protesting racism and those who were practicing racism. And, in a democracy, which has its moral context, that's not acceptable. So he has been appropriately chastised not only by people on the left and in the center, but by otherwise conservative members of his party, and rightfully so. We hope that this is, at the end of the day, a moment of maturity for President Trump.
Well, I'll put this in context because over the past couple of days, he has evolved. It's about time, maybe, but what does the improvement say?
Well, hopefully the improvement says that he is looking beyond the narrow band of his base, who are conservatives and who are members, unfortunately, of the alt-right, and who are, unfortunately, neo-Nazis, and who are, unfortunately, racists who admire the Confederate past. Hopefully he sees that America is larger than that, and that his presidency really depends on him reaching out to the whole country and respecting the whole country, even those who do not share his particular cultural or political pedigree.
Try to make a distinction when it comes to the past between respecting the people, the leaders in the past, and coming to terms with some unpleasant truths.
Well, I take a hard line on this. I don't think that we should pay any deference or respect to people in the past who practice apartheid, who practice slavery, who are supportive of oppressing other people. So to deconstruct or to even take away the statues, remove the statues across the country of Confederate so-called heroes is entirely appropriate. I think the critique that we bear on the past is appropriate. So when we think about ourselves as a democracy, we always need to be thinking of ourselves as ultimately evolving and having enough maturity to criticize the past and correct the ideas that people may have about the past. There's nothing glorious about the Confederacy.
This has been on news, and we're talking with Kevin Peterson from the New Democracy Coalition. Kevin, your latest piece in this on BUR, you point out that there's been, I guess, a deterioration of the sense about how things are going racially in this country.
A retrenchment politically and morally from the high days of the Civil Rights Movement, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And President Johnson's Great Society initiatives. There we were on the right trajectory. Just 5 decades later, post the Obama president, the first black president of the United States, we're experiencing a serious retrenchment. Some of it has to do with President Obama being president. There were a lot of people, white people, who were resentful of that. And we saw, there were Gallup polls sort of articulating at the end of Obama's presidency in 2016 that whites felt that they were not being treated fairly against the advancements made by blacks. So we saw that attitude starting to bubble up. It has exacerbated and intensified during the Trump presidency, and that is so disappointing. Hopefully we could use the energy that Charlottesville has galvanized on the left and among people of goodwill. Use that energy to correct ourselves morally and politically.
Well, I know, like many people, you fault the president on moral leadership in response to the event, but Chris, the other question is about his policies, whether it's immigration, voter verification, even some of the civil rights retrenchment from the Justice Department. Is that part of the problem, or can you draw a line between those two things?
Sure. No, all policy has its moral underpinnings, as I see it. So if you make a decision, or you try to develop a policy, for example, around revisiting college admissions, so that white people are not discriminated against, where there's no evidence that occurs. That's a moral statement shaped around public policy. Same with voter fraud, which had the current Justice Department claims that there is extensive voter fraud. To make a policy to try to correct that in the way that they're doing would disenfranchise poor people, disenfranchise people of color in general. That's a moral claim, sort of wrapped around the niceties of policy. So in my mind, there's no separation between statecraft, soulcraft, and morality claims.
Of course, another issue, and I think we're thinking about this in Boston as well. On one hand, you have messages from different sides, these fringes, but on the other hand, you see people who, they bring weapons. There's provocation going on, and then you have the Antifa involvement here, which is not typical of the progressive part, but that's a problem too, isn't it?
It is all a problem, and it calls for, as I say in the WBR piece, serious reflection and serious reaction to where we are as a state of the nation, and locally where we are as a state of the city. I'm happy to hear that Mayor Walsh has opposed the proposed rally this week. I'm happy to hear that he's taken a moral stance on it. But as I've said in other commentary, there are issues around the history of slavery in Boston that still hasn't been addressed. We look at Faneuil Hall, for example, constructed around the initial sale of a black slave. Should we have conversations around whether that Faneuil Hall is appropriately named? Should we have conversations around whether we should mark it in a different way? I think so. I think it's part of the racial healing that Mayor Walsh intends to bring to the city. So I'm glad he's doing the right thing in terms of this outside group coming in and rallying. But I think he and we also need to do work around some self-healing. And Boston suffers from a rich, entrenched, I should say, history of slavery and discrimination, and we need to address it.
And of course, that history, slavery, Massachusetts was the first state to legalize
That's right.
slavery, and the whole new
Our
world.
first governor was one of the first to own a slave in the United States, and I'm sorry, in the colonies.
So this is a very central feature of Massachusetts. This wasn't just a fringe thing with just a few people.
No, no. I mean, the good thing is that Massachusetts was also the first state to abolish slavery. So that is indicative of how we can be forward-looking, we can be enlightened. But I think Boston, I think Massachusetts to some extent, is one incident away from being a Charlottesville. I don't think we resolved issues around race. If you look at education, healthcare, poverty indices, blacks are still on the lower end of the totem pole, and that has to do with the institutional racism, still unresolved, still unmet.
I don't know if the people in the Boston area have much in common with the people in Charlottesville, but if something like that rolls into town here, the people who don't like this, who don't want us to tolerate it, should they go out there in force in some way, or should they just quietly say, I'm going to stay home, I'm not going to give these people the limelight?
No, I think active resistance. Dr. King taught us this. Active resistance in the cause of right is right. We all have moral obligations. If simply under the guise of being a secular Democrat with large D, not party affiliated, but believing in democracy, we should voice our opinion, and we should always, as citizens, try to be corrective in terms of ensuring that equality is available for everyone. So, if they were to, if this group, for example, were to come to Boston and have their rally, I would be out there sowing my discontent.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Kevin Peterson from the New Democracy Coalition. In a moment, we'll talk with a candidate for City Council in Roxbury's District 7.